he's done it. Joe Biden is president-elect and Donald Trump is getting the boot after a single 4-year term. I personally will miss Trump's bizarre turns of phrases, his dancing to the YMCA, but it will be good to see the back of a white supremacist who spent far too long in the White House, even if it is to be replaced by a centrist corporate Democrat. Dalia, Gebrial, it feels like it's been a kind of roller coaster 3 days. How are you feeling? Are you relieved at the results?
I'm absolutely exhausted by this entire process. I'm obviously relieved. However, we still did see a very high turnout for Trump, and but I am quite glad that I can go back to critiquing establishment Democrats now, because it was quite hard to hold my tongue for all that time.
Right, we're going to be joined in a moment by Micah, Uetricht, deputy editor of Jacobin, Novara's US columnist for this election. But he's not on the call right now. He will be very soon to give us some insight on what's going on. Incredibly eventful day. Before we go on to our first story, which is obviously that Joe Biden is the president-elect, you know the score, share the show link and tweet on the hashtag Tysky. We'll be going to your questions and comments throughout the show. So this morning we woke up knowing Biden had to either win Pennsylvania or two of Novara, Georgia and Arizona to reach the 270 electoral college votes needed to win the presidency. It's pretty clear now that he has done that. He's currently ahead in all of those states. And because the remaining votes are mail-in ballots, it's almost certain they will shift the margin only in his favor. He'll be addressing the country, the USA, tonight, their time. So after this show ends, most expect that to be a victory speech. But we can take a look at his last public appearance, by which point the final results already looked pretty clear.
Each ballot must be counted. And that's what we're going to see going through now. And that's how it should be. Democracy is sometimes messy. It sometimes requires a little patience as well. But that patience has been rewarded now for more than 240 years with a system of governance that's been the envy of the world. And we continue to feel, Senator and I, we continue to feel very good about where things stand. We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working. The count is being completed.
So obviously Biden there sort of asking people to be patient because Donald Trump was doing the opposite, trying to declare victory and all sorts of wild allegations about fraud without any evidence. We're going to look at sort of Donald Trump's response in detail in a moment. And for now, I want to look at Joe Biden and see how he has done it. So to remind ourselves of the states that he needed, how he's reached 270, we can get up this map from the NYT, the same thing we showed you on Wednesday, although now obviously updated. So still officially, Joe Biden is on 253 electoral college votes. The big states which are in play, Pennsylvania, if he gets that gets him over the line. There's 20 electoral college seats there. He's already ahead, and we expect him to only increase his margin over Donald Trump. That on its own would make Joe Biden the president. If he didn't win Pennsylvania by some sort of freak chance, then he could win, for example, Nevada and Arizona, which you can see there to the southwest, which he is ahead in both of again. It looks like, there is a chance that Donald Trump could close the gap in Arizona because the votes are going in his favor there. But again, it's an outside one. And significantly, Joe Biden is now also ahead in Georgia, which you can see there in the southeast of America. North Carolina will probably go to Donald Trump. I want to go to Dalia. All of this, it seems like our perspective on this election was kind of skewed by the order in which the votes came in. So anyone who sort of stayed up on the night of the election was sort of seeing votes coming in which looked much more favorable to Donald Trump than they were expecting. It looked like, this was, if Biden were to win it, it would be by the tightest of margins. In fact, at least in terms of the Electoral College and obviously in terms of the popular vote, because the Electoral College favors Donald Trump. This seems like actually a fairly, a solid victory for Joe Biden.
Well, there were many points at which Biden could have really had this in the bag, and he didn't put it in the bag. And I think that given the context, to have both a health crisis and an economic crisis in the year of an election, the odds were really, there was so much in Biden's favor. And also the fact that we've seen a very, very bad result in down ballot races, particularly in terms of the Senate. I would say it's probably a moderate result for Joe Biden for the presidency and a bad result down ballot. So overall, I would say the Democrats could have done much better. And I think that, at the moment, this kind of very sort of like this particular kind of victory, and we'll talk about this later, where there has been no decisive victory in the Senate, but we do have a blue president, could actually be a very, very tough situation over the next 4 years. So not good enough, really. Not
good enough. All right. No. It's his big day. Come on, he's just won the presidency anyway. No, I think that the substantive points there are all very important. You brought up the Senate, which is incredibly important in this situation. But before we go to the Senate results, we have got Micah now. Micah, how is it going? Are you excited?
Am I excited?
Is there a Jacobin victory party celebrating President Biden? Is that happening?
President Biden absolutely does not deserve a Jacobin or any other kind of victory party. Maybe we'll be celebrating that our book, Yesterday's Man, The Case of Joe Biden, the case against Joe Biden is now newly relevant.
So you'll get a sales boost at least. All right, let's talk about the Senate, because this was sort of the big disappointment, it looked like, for the Democrats. It still looks as if, to be honest, that the Republicans will hold it. Let's get up another NYT election map. So you can see here as things stand, both parties are on 48. Obviously, there's 100 seats in the Senate. I hope we can get this map up in one moment. There you go. So you can see there 48. There are 4 left remaining. One of those is in Alaska. They're very slow to count, presumably because it's far away. I don't know. But that's going to go to the Republicans. North Carolina, the Democrats were hoping to flip that seat. It looks like they won't. But the 2 remaining ones, these are very important, are in Georgia. In one of those is a by-election, which is going to happen in January, and the election, the runoff that was happening today, or the election with sort of the 2 candidates, it looked like that was going to be a senator was decided. Neither has got over 50%, so there's going to be basically 2 special elections in Georgia in January, and if the Democrats win both of those, then it will be 50-50 in the Senate, and the deputy president gets the deciding vote, which would mean you would have unified government. So you'd have the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives all controlled by the Democrats. Micah, that would obviously completely transform this situation. You could have, for example, in the Senate, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders with deciding votes. So they could basically, hold out for anything they wanted. Obviously, there'd be pressure from the other side as well. But how likely is it that these 2 Senate seats in Georgia could ultimately go to the Democrats?
Well, the flip of the Senate seems pretty unlikely at this point. And of course, also in the United States Senate, it's not just a question of whether you have a simple majority. It is about having a filibuster-proof majority, which is there's no way that there's going to be a filibuster-proof majority. So it seems like the most likely outcome is instead that Biden will have, he controls the White House, but that the Senate will remain in Republican hands, which will be a situation that will allow him to kind of throw up his hands repeatedly throughout his time in office, because anything that he would want to accomplish, he could point to any bill, not passing and the lack of movement on any major issue, to the recalcitrance of Republicans in the Senate. But of course, he ran on saying explicitly that he was not going to do anything big, anything transformational. Nothing would fundamentally change under his presidency. So if that's what he seeks to accomplish with his 4 years in office, it seems like he's set up pretty well to do that.
We're going to go into detail about sort of the prospects for a Biden presidency as the show goes on. First of all, I want to get to the question, the still live question, even though he has lost this election, of Donald Trump. Before we do that, if you're new to this show, even if you aren't, hit subscribe to that channel. We want to hit 100K very, very soon. We are due to, I think, in the next week or so, but we want to get over that 100K. So hit subscribe if you haven't already. As for Trump is not handling the results well. He delivered a typically bizarre address at the White House yesterday when it became clear that Biden was going to win the election. He wasn't willing to accept that. Let's take a look.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. And the pollsters got it knowingly wrong. They got it knowingly wrong. We had polls that were so ridiculous, and everybody knew it at the time. There was no blue wave that they predicted. They thought there was going to be a big blue wave. That was false. That was done for suppression reasons. But instead, there was a big red wave. And it's been properly acknowledged, actually, by the media. They were, I think, very impressed. As everyone now recognizes, media polling was election interference in the truest sense of that word by powerful special interests. These really phony polls, I have to call them phony polls, fake polls, were designed to keep our voters at home, create the illusion of momentum for Mr. Biden, and diminish Republicans' ability to raise funds. They were what's called suppression polls. Everyone knows that now. I've been talking about mail-in voting for a long time. It's really destroyed our system. It's a corrupt system, and it makes people corrupt even if they aren't by nature. But they become corrupt. It's too easy. They want to find out how many votes they need, and then they seem to be able to find them. They wait, and then they find them. And you see that on election night. We were ahead in vote in North Carolina by a lot, tremendous number of votes. And we're still ahead by a lot, but not as many, because they're finding ballots all of a sudden. Oh, we have some mail-in ballots. It's amazing how those mail-in ballots are so one-sided, too. I know that it's supposed to be to the advantage of the Democrats, but in all cases, they're so one-sided. Our goal is to defend the integrity of the election. We'll not allow the corruption to steal such an important election, or any election for that matter. And we can't allow anybody to silence our voters. And this is a case where they're trying to steal an election. They're trying to rig an election. In Philadelphia, observers have been kept far away, very far away, so far that people are using binoculars.
So far that people are using binoculars. Obviously, everything he said there, I mean, virtually everything he said there was completely untrue. He's confused as to why so many of the late ballots are coming back for the Democrats instead of him. That's because he told his supporters not to use the mail-in vote because he said it was fraudulent. That means that the Democrats told their supporters to use the mail-in vote to protect themselves from coronavirus, and that means that the later vote is weighted towards the Democrats. We're gonna go on in a slightly later in the show to why it's taking quite so long. But I want to focus on Trump first and sort of his attempt to defy reality and remain in the White House. That speech there was obviously widely condemned. A bunch of networks actually cut away from it when he was giving it live. MSNBC did, and because they said it was full of so many untruths that were unevidenced, it's sort of irresponsible to stream it. I was watching CNN. And when that was live, they did stream the whole thing, but they went back to Anderson Cooper straight afterwards, who described Trump as like an obese turtle flailing in the hot sun, which is one of the more memorable lines of this election cycle. Dalia, Biden's camp have said they will escort Trump out of the White House as a trespasser if he refuses to leave. What do you make of all of this? I mean, one thing is Trump kind of could have, if he'd stood up and done a normal concession speech, the way that sort of like American establishment politics works, everyone would be like, actually, that was the moment he became president. The moment he accepted he'd lost was the moment we'll forgive him for everything because now he's given a good John McCain-like concession speech. Why didn't he do that? Why can't he cut his losses? What is it? What's going on?
I think it's because he has his eye on the prize beyond the White House. We know that at in the first election in 2016, when he was almost certain, when he, thought he was going to lose, and we all thought he was going to lose. We know that his broader ambitions were, ambitions of hegemony. He wanted to set up a network. He wanted to continue the ball rolling on this kind of political hold that he had. And I think that this creating of this martyr ideology, this kind of mythology around him that, he is the rightful president, and it was stolen from him by the Democrats or by the establishment, serves very well for him continuing to build a political career outside of official politics, but sort of more in the tradition of the kind of Bannonite sort of securing media, a kind of alternative media hegemony. That serves very well. That will continue to galvanize his base around this sense that, they lost something that was rightfully theirs. And obviously, Trump's kind of appeal is very much based around this idea of feelings of loss and feelings of kind of being, cheated, as it were. So I think that this is why he hasn't conceded, because his eyes are not really on the mainstream kind of media. He knows that they're not probably going to give him a platform, that kind of whole circle is sort of, out of reach for him now. Whereas now he can continue to go on and build that base for this potential media network that he wants to build, and also for the general presence that he wants to continue to hold in public life through this kind of self-martyrdom route. So yeah, I think that's probably what he's got in mind. And also he's just a fucking sore loser as well. But I think that the more significant point going forward is the kind of power that he's trying to build outside of official politics, much like Sarah Palin kind of did. She was kind of too mad to make anything of it.
I mean, I feel like that speech last night didn't feel like, because he doesn't have a Steve Bannon working for him anymore, it didn't quite feel like, this is a plan for long-term hegemony. It just felt like, as you say, like a sore loser who'd been up for way too long and just went out and rambled and rambled and rambled. It wasn't even very, it wasn't a sort of inspiring fire and fury speech to his base. It was just like, what the hell is going on here? It's kind of sad. What I want to focus on now is people on his side who are backing him, because obviously sort of the length to which Trump can take this delusion depends on the extent to which his allies will maintain the farce. Obviously, CNN and the Democrats aren't buying it, but what about Fox News? Now, Fox News aren't wholly going along with the delusions. Maybe that's a surprise. I sort of asked on my Twitter, why is this happening? People said it's because Rupert Murdoch backs winners and Trump's clearly going to lose. Good analysis, I think. Their network initially infuriated Trump by calling Arizona for Biden before the other networks did. Trump obviously wanted to keep that in play for longer to cast more doubts about what was going on. And their hosts yesterday gave Trump's press secretary short shrift when she argued some mail votes shouldn't count.
We are fighting for the American people to know sooner rather than later. We want the votes to be counted.
But Kayleigh, we always have had provisional ballots and military ballots, things that get counted later. The votes have to be in by November 3rd. That was what their state legislature and their court system agreed to, that it had to be postmarked by November 3rd and then counted. So the voting is happening on Election Day. It's just how long it takes to get them counted. 3 days.
In Pennsylvania, they want to extend arrival for 3 days after. And the legislature, you're right, determines the time, the manner, and the place in which an election happens. And we believe if we go to the Supreme Court on this, we don't even think this will be necessary. Let me start there by saying we're going to win outright. But should those 3 extra days of ballots matter, we believe will prevail at the Supreme Court. But again, we don't think we're getting there because we're going to win by 40,000.
Even if the person voted on voting day, even if they voted on November 3rd in Pennsylvania because they were told that was okay to do, you're going to toss their ballot out if it doesn't come in until the day after or 2 days after.
No, we believe every vote on Election Day should be counted, but it's those that arrive after the Election Day that we are fighting in court.
Even if they already voted on November 3rd, which is the postmark.
We're fighting for those that are after November 3rd. We want Election Day ballots to be counted, and we will prevail.
It's interesting how people who brown-nosed Donald Trump for the last 4 years are now sort of suddenly giving him a hard time now that they know he's on the way out and they're cutting their losses. The Republican establishment, obviously a sort of different power base for Donald Trump. They opposed him when he stood, and then again all completely fell into line the moment he became president, where they sort of saw the direction of the party was going. They have been fairly quiet as well this time around, not as supportive as they used to be, just like Fox News. There has still been no word from the Senate leader Mitch McConnell, and for a while it seemed even Trump's most avid supporters in Congress were holding their tongues. We can get up a tweet from Donald Trump Jr. He's quote tweeting here, someone saying, "No, not one tweet from Lindsey Graham in 24 hours. And Donald Trump Jr. saying, "No one is surprised." He's sort of saying, even the supporters of Donald Trump in the Senate, they're too cowardly to speak up in favor of him now. That tweet seems to have had the desired effect, though, because shortly after that, Lindsey Graham went out on Fox News to put forward the president's case.
Election law is clear. It is clear that partisan observers can be there for the vote count. They're being denied access.
Yes, right.
Now, if that part of the election law is violated, now we also know that the Constitution allows state legislators to serve, they're the ones that would make decisions. Should these Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, if there's corruption in the law, they don't abide by the law and they don't allow observers in as the law calls for, should they then invalidate this?
I think everything should be on the table. So there's the process of observing an election that's being violated. Philadelphia elections are crooked as a snake. Why are they shutting people out? Because they don't want people to see what they're doing. But you're talking about a lot of dead people voting. You're talking about in Nevada people voting who are not legal residents. In Arizona, it's being run well. Doug Ducey's a great governor. He confirmed what your other guest just told me. Doug Ducey said this is coming down to a couple thousand votes one way or the other. I trust Arizona. I don't trust Philadelphia. I don't trust what's going on in Nevada. So everything should be on the table. Let's stand with President Trump. He stood with us.
So an interpretation of that, he trusts what's going on in Arizona because that's where Donald Trump is closing the gap. He's completely suspicious of what's going on in Nevada and Pennsylvania because that's where the late votes are coming in favor of Joe Biden. Very transparent, obviously unevidenced. I don't know how that's going to work for him. I want to go to one final group among whom Trump is receiving vociferous backing, really strong backing. There seems to be no questions asked whatsoever. This was Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White, giving a sermon yesterday.
Strike and 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 strike until you have victory. For every enemy that is aligned against you, let there be that we would strike the ground, for you will give us victory, God. I hear a sound of abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of shouting and singing. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. We lose confusion into every demonic confederacy directed right now at this election, directed specifically at the 6 states. We come against people that are working at high levels right now with demonic confederacies and secrecies and demonic plans and networks. We break it up and we command that it be exposed right now in the name of Jesus.
I can really see how, you can see how they get so much following. It's really hypnotic, lots of rhythm. Micah, what I want to put to you is that this to me doesn't seem like a winning coalition. Lots of people are saying, democracy is seriously under threat here because the convention of a peaceful transition of power are not being respected. But you've got on the one side, kind of the entire media establishment, rightly, basically everyone but the biggest nutcases in the Republican Party who are saying, mate, you need to stand down if you haven't got the most votes. And then on his side, he's got himself, a couple of Republican senators, a few of the sort of Fox talking heads, but not really the station, and then a bunch of evangelical Christians. I mean, this doesn't seem that threatening to me, is how I want to pose the question.
Well, Michael, you've clearly never been on the receiving end of these armies of angels that are coming from Africa and South America, where that pastor was summoning them from. So why don't you wait to see what they are capable of before you make a call like that? I mean, yeah, it's clear that everybody is sort of fleeing the sinking ship, and you can see that from Fox. I mean, on election day itself, Trump was denouncing Fox News, saying, I don't know if you saw the clip of them asking, teed up the clip for him. Mr. President, President Obama has been saying some stuff about you lately, and it's his favorite thing to knock out of the park, and instead he starts talking about how Fox News has been very unfair to him. They sense what's going on here, and I mean, it's not even clear to me that Trump wants to win. I mean, he doesn't want to lose, obviously, but it's also not clear to me that he wants to win. I think he's probably tired of having all these responsibilities in the White House. It's much, as Dalia was saying before, it's much better narrative for his longer term game. And I think something that he would find more enjoyment doing, to be able to go out, pointing the finger, saying that because they counted too much here, but they didn't count enough here, and just this bizarre narratives that don't even make any sense if you string them all together. But that will be what works best for the narrative that he wants to spin going out of here, that it was all unjustly stolen from him. That fits with this sort of alternate reality that has been constructed and has been taken up by incredibly a minoritarian current in American politics, but a significant one, and one that we should all be quite frightened by. And so everything is sort of being set up perfectly for that narrative to continue to thrive in the years to come, and to probably take more grotesque shapes after Trump is out of office in ways that I fear to even sort of fully try to wrap my mind around. I mean, a President Donald Trump Jr. in 2024 or 2028 is something that would not be out of the question, and who knows what's going to happen with the rabid right-wing evangelical base and the QAnon type people. I mean, all of them are just they're getting plenty of fuel. It's the same thing that his entire campaign has been, which is fueling this rabid base. It's not enough to win an election, but one does worry about where it goes once it's in an opposition position.
So there was concern that even if the constitutional mechanisms which kicked Donald Trump out of the White House sort of do fall into place, you would get at least, quite chaotic street violence or whatever. It seems at this point that, violence hasn't broken out. It seems more, almost comical to me. I'm sure there is some, intimidation going on in places, but we can see here people going and praying outside. Is that praying, or is that sort of like, it looks more like kind of casting a spell? I'm not quite sure what's going on there. We can also have a look at his supporters, who were quite entertainingly going to Arizona and saying count every vote, and going to Pennsylvania and saying stop the count. So depending on what state they were in, Michigan, and saying stop the count. Although I think their message was the same in Pennsylvania, while Donald Trump was still leading. I suppose more worrying was Steve Bannon, who on election day called for the beheading of Anthony Fauci, the head of the pandemic response, and the US FBI director. Dalia, I want to go to you on sort of the threat of, it's in a way Donald Trump sort of trying to hold on is funny. In a way, maybe there are going to be some more sinister, threatening consequences, and we should be taking it more seriously than being like, look how ridiculous all of these people are.
Yeah, and I think that the creation of that martyr narrative is very worrying, and that's not just in terms of the ways in which it could embolden or kind of give fuel to the fire in the US, but also I wonder the impact on the far right around the world. I think that not having their guy in the White House is probably going to demobilize them. It's definitely going to shrink their numbers. But I think that one thing that is missing from this conversation is, the kind of international implications. It's been really interesting to see like Bolsonaro kind of distancing himself from Trump. It's been interesting seeing kind of Boris Johnson not really saying much. But I think in general, we should be, we should still be very alert about the knock-on effects that this could have in the far right that was definitely emboldened by Trump's victory in 2016. But also, I just think that this is fundamentally, it is a blow. And I think I've been thinking especially about the impacts that this is likely to have on Brexit, and, what kind of Brexit we're going to end up having, because I think that there was definitely this kind of feigned idea that Donald Trump was going to look after Britain, even though I don't think he gives a shit about anything but himself. That's kind of gone out of the window. And if Biden is able to do his healthcare plan, which is sort of better than, it's not as good as it could be, but it's better than a lot of attempts in the past. If he was to be successful in that, then that could, buy us a few more years before the full privatization of the NHS. So I think I'm kind of like very interested to see how that martyr narrative is probably going to demobilize his allies that are sort of in government in other parts of the world. But I think it is likely to create a particular very committed base and reinvigorate that very committed base. But it's also likely to disenfranchise a lot of people as well. I think we just have to wait and see.
We're going to go back to the Democrats in a moment, talk about sort of what this means for Biden, the power base in the House of Representatives. First, I want to sort of get something out of the way, and I'm going to need sort of Micah's insight on this in a moment, which is why has the most powerful country in the world, supposed to be a beacon of democracy. I know, not many of our viewers believe that that's the case, but anyway, it has this image of itself, and it is, it's a wealthy, highly developed country. Why does it take so long to count votes? Because obviously that is the root of so much of this controversy, the fact that Donald Trump can say, I was winning, why am I losing now? Before I go to Micah, we can look at an explanation from Rich Fitzgerald. He's an official in Allegheny County in Michigan, or Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. He's explaining why it's taking quite so long for Pennsylvania to count all of the ballots.
Because we were not permitted to begin this process until Election Day. That should change. I know Florida and some other states, they pre-canvass, meaning days before they start taking open the envelopes. We weren't allowed to do anything with envelopes, secrecy envelopes, until Election Day. That delays the process. We could have had this done and given results on Tuesday night. We didn't have to go through this 3-4 day process if we were allowed to pre-canvass. So I hope our legislature, our state legislature, changes that.
You're frustrated. Are there any other frustrations that you have with this? I mean,
no, that's a frustration, and we warned everybody. And the governor tried to get this done. Governor Wolf did everything he could. Twice they came to him, the Republican legislature came to him and said, if you do this, we'll give it to you, Governor. And he said yes. And then they still said no. They couldn't take yes for an answer.
So in Pennsylvania, and I think Michigan and Wisconsin as well, what's being described there is it was Republican congresses, or Republican state congresses, that sort of said you can't count mail-in votes until Election Day. That's why it's been quite so slow in those states. Micah, what I want to know from you though is that the only explanation as to why this is taking long? And do sort of Americans realize that this is weird, that this is sort of like kind of embarrassing on an international perspective? Or do you guys just think that everyone takes 3 days to count the votes after an election?
Well, I'm not sure how much average Americans think about what goes on in the rest of the world at all.
It's the same with queues, right? Because everyone in America is like, oh, the 2-hour queue, that's a symbol of democracy. And we're like, no, that's a symbol that something's gone incredibly wrong. Like the whole process just seems completely dysfunctional.
Yeah, it's a symbol of your sort of democratic fortitude, that you're willing to wait in line for to vote rather than an indication that this might be some kind of voter suppression. I mean, the Republicans here and the way that the vote counting expected to go from the beginning was that there would be a kind of front-loaded Republican votes from Republicans who voted in person, and then the votes that would be counted in the days to come after Election Day would come in heavily for Democrats, which is what seems to have happened. And so the Republicans obviously had a stake in that. Continue, to pull. The longer that you can wait to count the votes that are mailed in, the longer time you have to say, look at the map, look how red it is, look at how we're up in all of these places. So it's just sort of par for the course for the incredibly undemocratic, as I wrote in Novara recently, democratic. This is, the freest and most democratic country on earth that really does not have a whole lot of democracy when it comes to these political institutions. And of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, by votes later, you can have Trump's press secretary making these very nakedly open arguments saying that votes should be suppressed, that Trump can give that bizarre speech where the upshot of it is these votes should be suppressed. I mean, this has been very central to the Republican strategy for winning elections of all kinds. And this didn't start with Trump. This has been going on for decades at this point. So there are so many undemocratic institutions in America that need reform. It's not clear to me that there is much of a conversation that can create an appetite for the kind of democratic reforms that are needed. It's looking like Biden is going to somewhat comfortably win the electoral college vote. There will not be the discrepancy between an electoral college vote and the popular vote that many of us thought there might be. And so that might mean that there is less of an appetite to reform the highly undemocratic electoral college system because people will not be angry at the discrepancies. So
you're cutting out slightly, so we'll go back to this point in a moment. I mean, I suppose that final point, there's only the urgency to reform the electoral college when you lose the presidency, but it's only when you win the presidency that you might actually have some influence and ability to reform the electoral college. It's a bit of a catch-22 there. A couple of super chats. Alexandra L with a $5. Watching with my boyfriend Rowan, who is celebrating his birthday today and is a huge fan. It would make his day to get a happy birthday from you. Happy birthday, Rowan. I hope the end of Donald Trump was a good birthday gift for you. AC with a $5. Here's a quid for every one of the losers who have given this a thumbs down. Keep up the good work, Novara. I like that's good. That's a good. People commit to giving us a quid every time someone gives a thumbs down, and then hopefully no one will do it again. Really hurts me when that happens. David Duffus for a free. Keep up the good work. And Rusty Sleeves with a $5. Is it a coincidence furlough has been extended when Trump is looking likely to lose? Cost of Brexit no deal being buried under the corpses of COVID. I'd say probably not. Although the connection between the furlough and no deal Brexit could be quite interesting. They could be thinking that will sort of temper whatever economic chaos we have after that. But I'd say the connection to Trump probably slightly more difficult to make. Okay, we're going to go on to some people who are more exciting than Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been elected president, but at 77, he's not going to be the party's future. At Novara, we're hoping that role will fall to the progressive new generation in the Democratic Party and in Congress. Figures like AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. And when it comes to progressive Congress people, there was some good news this Tuesday. At least 3 more progressives were elected. The squad is expanding. Of the new representatives who've been elected, Cori Bush is probably the most exciting. She's a Black Lives Matter activist. Let's take a look at her acceptance speech.
Your congresswoman elect loves you. And I need you to get that, because if I love you, I care that you eat. If I love you, I care that you have shelter and adequate, safe housing. If I love you, I care that you have clean water and clean air and you have a livable wage. If I love you, I care that the police don't murder you. If I love you, I care that you make it home safely. If I love you, I care that you are able to have a dignity and have a quality of life the same as the next person, the same as those that don't look like you, that didn't grow up the same way you did, those that don't have the same socioeconomic status as you. I care. And so regardless of whatever was, this is our moment and this is our time and that's how it will be. And so when you walk away from here, you walk with your chest poked out that change has come to this district, and it's come by way of first, we are going to love and respect and honor one another to change the face of this district and become who we know we can be, to have a safe, loving, welcoming, thriving community. This moment is brought to us, by our movement for social, racial, and economic justice. Now, our movement is going to Congress, and we will meet the challenges of this moment as a movement, side by side, arm in arm, with our fists in the air, ready to serve each other until every single one of us is free. Thank you for electing me as your first Black Congresswoman here in the state of Missouri.
Really amazing speech there. There are other sort of candidates to be excited about who have been recently elected. I think we're going to get the graphics from the Justice Democrats, who sort of really got behind this new generation of progressives, to go through some of them. So we've got Jamal Bowman. They're saying about him, he's the 11-year-old boy who was beaten by police officers and then started his own public school to take care of his community, is now officially going to be a congressman. He unseated, but earlier in the year, I think it was the fourth most senior Democrat in the House of Representatives, like a real hawk. So a real positive change there. We can get up Newman. So Marie Newman, of her, they write, Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, reproductive rights, progressive foreign policy, justice reform, and ending skyrocketing inequality. The bloc of mission-driven progressives is growing in Congress. All very exciting stuff. As you can imagine, though, unsurprisingly, if anyone sort of viewed the politics of centre-left parties in the West, the moment of new progressives being elected into Congress, and the moment of a Democrat president being elected, is also one to have a massive Barney between the centre-left and the left of the Democratic Party. So apparently there was a 3-hour-long Zoom call yesterday between representatives, or all the existing representatives in Congress, and a big battle between the progressives and the right of the party, to explain, I suppose, the disappointing votes, the disappointing results, especially down ballot, but also, Joe Biden didn't do as well as people were expecting in places like Florida. But mainly the disappointment is because the Democrats have lost seats in the House and they haven't gained the Senate. And we can go to a report in the Washington Post to sort of describe the row as it happened. So it says, the explanation laid out by centrists, according to multiple people who were on the call and spoke on the condition of anonymity, is that Republicans were easily able to paint them all as socialists and radical leftists who endorse far-left positions such as defunding the police. We need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. We lost good members because of that. Representative Abigail Spanberger, who narrowly leads in her re-election bid, said heatedly, if we are classifying Tuesday as a success, we will get effing torn apart in 2020. Now that line, 2022, apologies. Now that line, which is blaming any failure on the left, received some pushback from Rashida Tlaib, a self-described democratic socialist. We can get up more copy from the Washington Post. Apparently she grew angry, accusing her colleagues of only being interested in appealing to white people in suburbia. To be real, it sounds like you are saying stop pushing for what black folks want, she said. To find out about this row, what's going to happen, I spoke earlier to Waleed Shahid. Now, he was a brilliant person to manage to speak to today because he is a spokesperson for Justice Democrats. So exactly that organisation that organised for AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and now these three very exciting Congress people who have just won their elections. So when I spoke to Waleed, I started by asking what he makes of the left getting blamed for a disappointing Democratic result.
Yeah, there's a couple of points there. One, when you lose, you want to blame everyone. So these people spent the past 2 years saying progressives have no power, and suddenly they have all the power in the world to make the moderates lose their seats. The best thing that has been said by some of these conservative Democrats is that they're advising everyone not to run on a Green New Deal and Medicare for all and aligning themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement. Because they're saying those things are unpopular. Meanwhile, they did not run on those things and still lost their seats. And so their advice is a little, internally doesn't make sense. But the Democratic Party establishment, the leadership had one job and they blew it, and it was their job in the House and the Senate. I think a big thing is that a lot of these conservative Democrats, their main message tends to be that the left is going too far to the left and Trump is going too far, and we just want to seek common ground. And that is not really a compelling, positive message. There's no substance to that message. It's tactical, it's academic, it's about negotiating. Even if they wanted to run on a more conservative platform, running on this message of just common ground is not necessarily a message to defeat the party of Donald Trump.
That was Waleed Shahid's take. And we can also look at AOC's take. She put out her 2 cents on Twitter today about the left getting blamed. So she wrote, "There are folks running around on TV blaming progressivism for Dem underperformance. I was curious, so I decided to open the hood on struggling campaigns of candidates who are blaming progressives for their problems. Almost all had awful execution on digital during a pandemic." She also points out that some of the best digital companies were actually banned by the Democratic elections campaign because they had worked with progressives who were trying to unseat incumbents. So basically, her argument is that the organization was terrible on the part of the Democratic establishment candidates, and that's why they haven't done quite so well. I want to go back to Waleed Shahid because I also asked him, regardless of who gets the blame for a disappointing set of results, we are going to see a Congress this time around that looks quite different to what it has done for the previous 2 years. So my question was, who's going to come out empowered by the results from Tuesday? If you look at the Democratic Party in Congress, is it the left or the right who are going to come out from this election saying, yes, this is our chance, we're now on top?
It's a mixed bag. So because conservative Democrats in swing seats, a lot of them lost their seats, that means there is a much more of a leverage point for progressives to organize a bloc within the House. That said, if Mitch McConnell takes the Senate and holds on to the Senate, that really does have a major impact on any sort of progressive, even center-left legislation passing through, because Mitch McConnell has shown over the past 10 years that he is unwilling to do anything Democrats want, whether that Democrat is Barack Obama or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So I really think that where we're heading, if Republicans hold on to the Senate, is a crisis of democracy, because Democrats will have won the majority of the votes by millions of people. They will have held on to the House, and Mitch McConnell will represent minority rule, essentially, as well as the Supreme Court. If Joe Biden goes through with pursuing deals with Mitch McConnell, he might create toxic compromises and immoral compromises that will create real friction and factions within the Democratic Party about why the hell are we negotiating and compromising with Mitch McConnell when he does not represent. Why is he a co-governing partner? And he doesn't represent the majority of Americans who elected us to be here. And so that is like a central question that I think will dominate the next few years of American democracy if he holds on to the Senate. So it's really complicated. So in some ways, progressives do have more leverage in the House, but the Senate is ultimately the roadblock to progressive legislation, as well as the Supreme Court. And so it's not super clear one way or the other.
That was Waleed Shahid talking about the power struggles which we're now going to see within the Democratic Party. Micah, I want to go to you. So much to talk about there. I suppose the issue of the centrists now blaming the left. The left presumably are going to say the reason you didn't do so well is because your candidate did only just enough to get elected. What I'm hearing is people saying because your campaign was only anti-Trump, then it made sense. The logical conclusion for a voter would say, okay, well, if the problem was Trump, but Republicans are fine, then I'll vote against Trump, but vote Republican. And then the other issue coming out of this is, who is going to be able to capitalize on this? Do you see centrists trying to use this and succeeding as a chance to sort of vilify the left and say these people are toxic, you don't want to get near them? Or do you see, the fact that the squad is now at least 7? I mean, depending on who you include, there's definitely 7. Could be more. Do you see this as this result as an opportunity for the progressive left within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, definitely, especially because we're probably going to see very soon the centrist Democrats not be able to deliver on very much in the coming years. And the agenda that the squad and the rest of the resurgent left in America has been running on is wildly popular in America. It's funny to hear people like Representative Spanberger, who you quoted, who, by the way, is literally a former CIA agent. So I'm not sure anybody should be shocked that an actual former CIA agent would be denouncing socialism on a call. That's sort of was her bread and butter in her former career. But the ideas that socialists are pushing right now, like Medicare for All, repeatedly being shown in polls that overwhelmingly popular among Americans. The Democrats in this election, certainly Joe Biden himself, did not run on socialism. They ran on being anti-socialists, and yet they were called socialists anyway, which they should be familiar with from all of the history of American politics in the last half decade or half century, right? I mean, this is standard stuff. This is, Biden was the vice president to Barack Obama, who was constantly called a socialist. So they're going to call them, the Republicans are going to call them socialists no matter what they do. Maybe they should try embracing the policies that are associated with socialism that are actually quite popular among the American people.
Yeah, there were also some exit polls on election day, weren't there, that were going sort of viral on Twitter because it showed that I think 60% of the population wanted Medicare for all. All of these progressive policies were coming out as very popular. Also, you saw the £15 minimum wage passing in a referendum within the same electorate who voted Trump by quite a decent margin. So you are obviously seeing people who are inclined to vote Republican who are also in favor of what we'd call progressive policies that aren't actually part of the Democratic platform. Dalia, I want to go to you because an interesting thing about the Justice Democrats, and it's something that, we don't necessarily have a comparative organization, and it's not necessarily something that would fit even within our political system, is they have sort of handpicked these really inspiring candidates. I think you can nominate candidates to be sort of promoted by the Justice Democrats to enter into Congress. And it does, in a way, what happened in the UK is by accident, someone won the leadership of the Labour Party and were not really in a position to make it work. I mean, obviously it worked for a while, but there wasn't the groundwork that had been done because it was a complete surprise. Whereas on the Democratic left, it kind of feels like they've actually had quite a lot of time to sort of grow and nurture their roots and build up these candidates from the bottom, and they haven't been put forward yet to a sort of national election where they could just get completely destroyed by the establishment. And in a way, it seems like, they've got kind of, I sort of look at it and think, yeah, I want what they've got. It seems so much more coherent and less messy than what's happening in the UK right now.
Yeah, and that is a fundamental strategic difference, is that the insurgent progressives in America identified that they are not going up against the Republicans. They're going up against the states. They're going up against the establishment. And that involves changing the fabric of the party, right? Whereas here, I think you're right that part of it was that there was a kind of surprise election. There was a surprise leadership change, and that kind of groundwork had not been done to actually change the party. But I also think that is kind of letting the sort of Labour left off the hook, and that there was a significant amount that could have been done to change the party and to change the fabric of the party, and that didn't happen for multiple reasons. But I think that it's just absolutely enraging. And Micah was right there in that, Barack Obama, before the squad, there was no squad when Barack Obama ran for president, and yet he was routinely called a socialist. You are going to be called this no matter what, so you may as well, go for the things that actually make you popular rather than constantly being scared. And what makes me so frustrated is that, Chuck Schumer is the epitome of conservative Democrats, the epitome of, that wing, and he failed. His Senate bid failed when it should have won. And there was this reliance that, the combination of economic crisis, of a pandemic, and of sort of, Trump being a general chaos would be enough for the Democrats to simply win down ballot. That, they didn't actually have to offer anything that was a deviation from the pre-Trump norm, that they just had to sort of sit there and stay still while sort of Trump delivered them a victory. And clearly that didn't work. That was a wrong call. And that those who actually had the boldness to offer an alternative vision were much more effective. And so much money was poured into right-wing Democrats like Amy McGrath and all these people, and they lost. And, that alongside with the fact that the actual policies, such as universal healthcare, such as, around policing, are actually and around a Green New Deal, are actually very popular. There really is no data whatsoever to support this assertion by centrist and right-wing Democrats that, the tarring of the term socialist, or it's because of the Squad, it's because of people like Ilhan Omar and AOC that are the reason that they failed in the Senate. The data is actually very much suggesting the opposite.
Micah, I want to know from you, sort of in very, everything you're saying is in very factual terms, but I want you to lay out sort of what President Biden can and can't do if there is a Republican Senate. So I'm thinking things like the Iran deal. Can he change the Iran deal? Can he reintroduce that? Can he reduce sanctions? What about the Paris Agreement? What can he do on climate change? Presumably healthcare is kind of out of the window because that's legislative. But what could Biden achieve over the next 2 years if there is a Republican Senate, and what's completely ruled out?
Well, there are, for one thing, as we were mentioning earlier, his list of a kind of dream agenda for his first term is not much of an agenda at all. He didn't really run on much of an agenda. So even if he had smooth sailing in terms of what he could accomplish, it's really up in the air about what he would actually, what his dream agenda would even mean, what he would pass if he had his druthers. Maybe not much of anything. But there certainly are, in the same way that you can use the presidency, there are sort of like legislation you can accomplish, and then there is the sort of bully pulpit, changing of the tenor of the political conversation that you can use the presidency for. And he's both of those things. There's no indication that he's going to do a whole lot. He could pass executive level, executive orders, for example, which has. That was discussed when we were, we and Jacobin wrote quite a bit about what President Bernie Sanders could have done over the head of a hostile Congress, whether it was controlled by the Democrats or the Republicans, on a whole range of issues. I believe Biden has pledged to rejoin the Paris climate agreements. But yeah, any kind of substantive legislation on healthcare reform will probably not be happening. Of course, the other thing to talk about is not just the Republican-controlled Senate, but now the Supreme Court, which is overwhelmingly dominated by conservatives at this point, with the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett. There's now a 6-3 conservative majority, yet again putting strong right-wing power in the hand of the institution with almost no democratic accountability mechanisms whatsoever. So the ability for someone like a President Joe Biden to overcome the Republican-dominated Senate and all of these other institutions would require him to have some kind of creativity and some kind of oomph about wanting to use his position to overcome those things. But what we saw under President Obama, what we've seen from much of the rest of the Democratic Party is, as I mentioned before, just kind of like, well, what are we supposed to do when these institutions are controlled by Republicans? It becomes an excuse for not trying to push any kind of seriously progressive legislation in any significant way. And it's a real worry of mine that these next 2 years could just go by without much of anything happening from a President Joe Biden, which will, of course, set up the Republicans for a landslide in 2 years, maybe even taking the House back. Who knows? Okay, we could put them in a very good position to really clean house in the very near future.
Just thinking about Biden as a candidate makes that clear as well, right? Because Obama, even if there were, even if his legislative legacy was somewhat limited, he could kind of make up for it in sort of rhetorical prowess. Like people looked at him as like, yeah, this is a great president, even though he didn't seem to achieve that much. Whereas Joe Biden, his whole campaign was based on the fact that he would hide from the cameras, so you didn't realize that he's kind of struggling. So the idea that a Biden who can't achieve anything in terms of legislation, but also then can't really go out and communicate to the public, it does just seem like it's going to be a bit of an empty shell of a presidency. I want to end the show by going to a debate about the sort of resilience of Trump's support base. First of all, Let's go to a few super chats. Joss Nichols with a $5. Novara almost on 100k subs. Rosamund Irwin, stop the count. If you watch Monday's show, you know that we had some beef with Rosamund Irwin, who's a Times journalist who sort of tried to include us in an article about anti-Semitism in a way that was just an obvious smear. And when we do get to 100k, we're going to have some special content for you. Do hit subscribe if you're new to the show. We've got Graham Ball with $14.99. Please say happy birthday to my wife Sandy, who is 70 tomorrow. We both love Tysky and the whole of NM. You bring insight, wisdom, and integrity to an otherwise rather murky and misleading media landscape. What a lovely comment. And happy birthday, Sandy. Jane Hayward with £3. 3 more thumbs down appeared, so here's £3. Very good. I really like this. Keep that going. Any thumbs down should get us a quid. We need to disincentivize people to be so cruel under our stream. And Orlando Cat with a $5. Thank you very much. We do appreciate it. What I want to talk about finally is, and in a way, this election, even though it's had a different outcome, Donald Trump has not won this election. He's lost it. In fact, many of the states he won last time that gave him the presidency have swung to Biden. That's the reason he's lost now. Those states in the Midwest are now Democrat again. But because of the strength of Trump's vote still, it wasn't a blue wave, it wasn't a washout. It hasn't really killed Trumpism, or that's what it seems like at this point in time. And people are again asking the question of how could so many people vote for this man? People are saying Biden, why are people saying Biden hasn't done well? He's got the most votes ever of any presidential candidate. Well, Donald Trump's got the second most votes ever of any presidential candidate in this election. Yeah, it wasn't enough, but it's significant. And again, just as we had in 2016, there's sort of a debate raging about what it is that drives people to support Donald Trump. And again, there's sort of this distinction being made between reasons concerning racism, essentially, and reasons concerning the economy, often focusing on that particular subset of Trump voters who one could say have, economic dissatisfaction and more economic anxiety. The case for it being about sort of the entrenched racism in America was put in this brilliant intervention.
America's not unique in its sins. As a country, we're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them and the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal, so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, that 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
So my mistake, I thought that was a clip from just after the election. Actually, it's a clip that's just gone viral after the election, but it was from last summer. But I mean, the point still stands that these points are still being made, that we can't say, whoop-de-doo, Donald Trump is out of the White House because, you know, there are still 70 million people voting for him. That was obviously the position being put forward, that the problem is sort of the inherent racism of America. It was an academic called Eddie Glaude. We can go to sort of the distinct other explanation. You can call it opposite, or you can say they're sort of mutually reinforcing. That's something we're about to discuss. But this is Andrew Yang explaining sort of the resilience of Trump's support.
Democrats don't do a good job of speaking to working class people. What do you say to that? You're supposed to be fixing that.
I had that experience countless times on the trail, Don, where I would say, hey, I'm running for president, to a truck driver, retail worker, a waitress in a diner, and they would say, what party? And I'd say Democrat, and they would flinch. Like I'd said something really negative, or I just had turned another color or something like that. And there's something deeply wrong when working class Americans have that response to a major party that theoretically is supposed to be fighting for them. So you have to ask yourself, what has the Democratic Party been standing for in their minds? And in their minds, the Democratic Party, unfortunately, has taken on this role of the coastal urban elites who are more concerned about policing various cultural issues than improving their way of life. Yep. That has been declining for years. And so if you're in that situation, this to me is a fundamental problem for the Democratic Party, because if they don't figure this out, then this polarization and division will get worse, not better.
Is that real, or messaging, or both?
It's real. I mean, Debbie just said they lost a plant that had 1,500 workers. And so if you're a laid off worker from that plant and you look up and say, what is the Democratic Party doing for me? It's unclear. And we can talk about a unifying message from Joe Biden. He's a naturally very unifying figure. But then there's the reality on the ground where their way of life has been disintegrating for years. And if we don't address that, then you're going to see a continued acceleration toward the institutional mistrust that animated the Trump vote and will continue to do so.
That was Andrew Yang speaking, as you could see from what was on the screen, as the presidential results were coming in. Dalia, I want to go to you first. And I suppose, one way of framing this is, look, Donald Trump, when he stood in 2016, was standing as an economic populist. He was saying, we are gonna bring back jobs. He was sort of saying, I'm not against Social Security. I'm not necessarily here for the rich. In power, all he has done is basically cut taxes. Jobs have been going up, but in the same way, kind of that they went up under the Conservatives over the last 10 years. They haven't gone up because any social democratic reforms have been implemented, obviously. For you, does that put to bed this debate about whether it's economic anxiety or inherent racism among America's white population that sort of explains the resilience of a character like Trump and a Trumpist Republican Party?
Honestly, I am exhausted by this debate. We have been writing and speaking and organizing for years and years and years on the basis that this division between racial and class politics is completely artificial. And, this is a debate that is being had very much in euphemisms. When they talk about, not speaking to the working class, and they talk about, coastal urban elites, and later on in that clip, Yang talks about, that the Democrats are too invested in policing of cultural behaviors or language or something. What are you talking about there? Are you talking about racism? Well, racism is a class issue, and the Democrats did not run on an anti-racist platform. So the idea that the reason that they didn't do as well as they should have done is because they spend too much time talking about racism is absolutely laughable. Demands from the anti-racist movement are around things like defunding the police, a Green New Deal, universal healthcare? And are those issues that are just cultural or just sort of about cultural policing? I think not. Now, is it true that the establishment has tried to co-opt anti-racist demands into liberal ones? Absolutely. Is it true that there is a, bourgeoisie of color that has, that does not represent the class interests of working class people of color? Absolutely. Is that the basis on which we should be guiding our politics and our stances on racial capitalism? Clearly not. And honestly, the white left and liberals have really got some fucking nerve on them. And I'm sort of sick of being lectured to about class and capitalism by people who actually don't understand how the boundaries within and around class are made in the 21st century. And, not only do people like the Democrats and people who make these kinds of arguments, not only do they offer working class people of color absolutely nothing, but they throw them under the bus in the name of winning. And then when those black and brown working class people come out and actually push the Democrat Party over the line, despite them not deserving the votes, they then come out and say, oh, well, it's your fault because you made us talk too much about racism that we lost, that we didn't do as well as we should have. And this kind of whitening of the working class, it's cynical, it's lazy, it's not grounded in reality. Because when you're talking about, again, this coastal urban elites versus the working class, it's like, okay, so you're talking about what, New York, California? Well, for every, millionaire living in those kind of coastal areas, and the same goes for kind of these very flattening and ignorant narratives about sort of London that happen in this country. For every millionaire or billionaire, there's 200, 300 precarious workers, the majority of them black and brown, fighting for their lives and at the front line of working class struggle. And, the reality is that these two parties are both neoliberal parties, Democrats and Republicans. They cannot work for the truckers that, Andrew Yang talks about in any meaningful way. The way that the Republicans try and move through that is that they mobilize whiteness and racial terror in order to disenfranchise black and brown working class people and to create bonds between white elites and white working class people. And that's what, in that earlier clip was meant by the idea that one of the aims of the anti-racist working class movements is to try and free white people from being white. And in turn, the Democrats move through that the fact that they are it's a neoliberal party and cannot offer working class people anything meaningful by offering very mealy-mouthed sort of triangulations, trying to kind of get in on the action of, the effect that whiteness can have, while trying to not to go too far and present themselves as the kind of slightly kinder face. And, that's kind of why they routinely lose. It's not because we talk too much about racism and patriarchy. And when he talks about, those truckers flinching when they hear the word Democrat, are they doing that because of AOC? Are they doing that because of Ilhan Omar? Or are they doing that because of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer? Because let me tell you, I also flinch when I think about them. And so this whole idea, that it's economic anxiety driving what is a very racial, that we can somehow counterpose economic anxiety against, the goals of an anti-racism movement is absolutely farcical. It's imagined and it's done by white liberals and it's also done by the white left. Because let me tell you something, no one experiences economic anxiety like someone with uncertain migration status or someone who the breadwinner of their family was incarcerated. So we need to put this once and for all to bed. I don't want to hear it anymore, basically.
Very persuasively put, Dalia. Micah, what I want to throw to you is because this question is all very much wrapped up in the future of Trumpism, the future of the Republican Party. The reason there was this sort of debate about is it economic anxiety, is it racism, is because you ended up having a candidate in 2016 who put forward both economic populism and racism. And is that still going, which was almost, rare for the Republicans, because normally what they put forward is a slightly more subtle racism with economic liberalism. Do you think that the next presidential candidate for the Republican Party, it might be Donald Trump, will be as overtly racist and as, we might say dishonestly anti-establishment as Donald Trump was?
Well, that'll depend, I suppose, on how the battles shake out within the Republican Party over the months and years to come. I mean, certainly that strategy, even though it didn't win the presidential election in 2020, that strategy has gotten that party quite a bit of mileage in recent years. So we can expect them to continue doubling down on it. But I mean, the problem, as Dalia was getting at, is that that is what that party is doing, and there really is nothing of substance that comes. There's not a real opposition to that kind of agenda on any front, whether it's on a substantive anti-racism, whether it's on an actual economic agenda for the working class of America, which is mentioning, is a multiracial working class, is a class that is disproportionately black and brown. There is a real, the truck drivers that Andrew Yang was referring to in that clip are not wrong to flinch at the hearing of the Democratic Party, because they do associate it with the kind of neoliberal policies that it has been pushing for several decades at this point. And we saw an alternative in 2020 and in 2016 of what a campaign that can kind of explode this false binary of race or class. Which one do we actually care about? Which one should we actually be pushing for? That was the Bernie Sanders campaign that gave no truck to racism, that said over and over again that immigrants to the United States are not the reason why your wages are flatlining, why you're in debt from your kid going to college, or for your medical bills. That has everything to do with the kind of person who was at the top of the ticket of the Republican Party, of the billionaire class that profits off of xenophobia, that profits off of racism, that lasts all the way to the bank. So I think that, and of course, that is also the agenda that we see in the Squad. We see the false binary of these two choices through this resurgent left. One that is steadfastly anti-racist, and it puts its anti-racism in a bold working class frame that actually gives a positive agenda for people to take hold of. The Democratic Party is doing everything it can to shut down that attempt to do politics that way in America. But clearly that's the only way forward, and it's certainly the only way forward for us to get out of what I agree with Dalia is a really interminable and sort of absurd at this point debate about, is it race or is it class? We see a way for what we see how that's actually a false binary, and a way out of that kind of false binary in this new left politics in America.
Dalia, I saw some nodding. Your final thoughts, and then we'll probably go offline. Go get you're not going to have a celebratory beer. I'll have a beer, and then we'll sort of have we'll call it a sort of relief beer instead of a celebratory beer. Dalia.
Yeah, I think that the ability of people like AOC, of people like Cori Bush, to articulate an anti-racist politics as a class politics and vice versa has been so key to their success. And I think that has to be the future of the Democrat Party. It has to. Otherwise, where are we going to go? Otherwise, how is it's going to just continue to unfold in the way that it's unfolding, and it's going to continue to give fuel to the fire of white supremacy. So essentially, for that reason, that if I'm going to celebrate anything, it's going to be, the fact that the Squad has, not only kept itself, but has actually grown slightly. And I think it's about time that we were, now that Biden is pretty much president, it's now time that we fight, that, progressives in the US fight for that to be the future of the Democrat Party.
We are going to end on some super chats. AAJ with 15 quid. Thanks, Dalia, for your righteous anger about liberals and right-wingers trying to pretend race and class issues are in opposition to each other when we know they are interlinked. Ryan B with 50 quid. This feels like a thumbs down tax to me. Also, I was born on Sunday too many years ago. Happy birthday, me. Happy birthday, you. Happy birthday, Ryan. Does saying that's a thumbs down tax, did we get 50 thumbs down? That would be very hurtful if that happened. Maybe you're giving us like a tenner for each thumbs. I don't know how this is working. I'll have to look at the ratio afterwards. John Dunn with a $5. This is a bit less thrilling than CNN's Super Wall, but you deserve a $5 anyway. Sorry, we'll work towards the Super Wall. If anyone hasn't been watching live CNN coverage, you've got for about 3 days, they've just been saying numbers sort of quicker than an auctioneer. Sort of says, we're in this state now, and it was 500 last year, this time it's minus. I can't even do it, but I mean, I find it quite relaxing listening to sort of the barrage of numbers come at you, but you can give it a go. Mr. Spooks, 10 euros and 1 cent. Well, you now have over 1,000 likes, so over 1,000 pennies. Thank you very much. And a $5 from Sally Sue and Loveheart. Thank you to Micah Uetricht and Dalia Gebrial. A pleasure to be joined by both of you this evening. And thank you to our Tysky Sour audience for tuning in on a Friday evening. It's always a pleasure spending my Fridays with you. Thank you for all of the super chats. As you know, what really keeps this organization going is our regular subscribers, our regular donors. If you are up for giving us the equivalent of a 1 hour's wage a month, please do go to novaramedia.com/support. It means the world to us. Means we can keep making these shows better, more crisp, potentially more often, or we'll sort of expand the range of what we offer to you. But I mean, we really appreciate it. We are going to be back on Monday at 7 p.m. I don't know what we'll talk about. Probably a bit more about the American elections. Maybe something big will have come up in the UK between now and then. For now, you've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.